Today is a glorious day. We are at the Los Angeles County Arboretum and Botanical Gardens, and it's a glorious day for a couple reasons. First of all, the news of yesterday was so rejuvenating, and Robert and I are celebrating today at this beautiful garden spot in Arcadia in California. And it's also a glorious day because we're outside. If there's a little bit of a chill in the air, and there's some fall flowers in the garden. So I thought we would take a walk and have a conversation with Robert, who has spent the last 4 years writing 1,020 newsletters, one every day, to encourage, reassure, inform, enlighten us about the political landscape and Trump's tenure. I told Robert, as the election was nearing, that I wanted to interview him after the election and sort of have him reflect on the last 4 years and what it has meant to him and to us. And he said that he wouldn't do a sit-down interview. He would only do an interview where we would maybe walk and talk and have a conversation. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a conversation today as we walk and talk in the Arboretum. Many of you know that I write a garden blog, and so that's why we're in the Arboretum, because many of my readers have found it also calming to reflect on nature and to think about growing green things in the midst of all of the chaos of the last 4 years. So 4 years ago today, when Trump won the presidency, my daughters were devastated. And they proclaimed that they could never watch the news, and that they really felt like moving forward was going to be so difficult. And so after the election, we looked at each other, and I said to Robert, what can we do? What can we do to help heal, help reassure, help our daughters get through this? And Robert said, I will write a newsletter. I'll write a newsletter every day to keep them informed, to let them know what is happening in the world and make sure that they feel safe. And so that's what he did, and that's what he's been doing. And so really, the readers of the newsletter are beneficiaries of my husband's commitment to his family, to his daughters, and to me. So the first question that many of our readers ask us is, who are you, Robert Hubbell? And what gives you the authority to write this newsletter? So what would you say to that, Robert?
So every week I get several emails from readers that say, who are you? Because they have gotten the newsletter from friends, and those friends may not know who I am. So we'll address that in a moment, but let me address a few other questions that I get frequently. Readers want to know, how many people get the newsletter? Well, I use Constant Contact for my database, and I currently have about 17,000 people in my database, but the newsletter gets passed around a lot. And so about, on average now, 30,000 people a day read the newsletter. The first proto-newsletter that I sent out went to 5 family members and 3 friends. In fact, it wasn't a newsletter, it was just a nightly email. So I'm a husband and father writing to his family every night, and everyone else gets to listen in to that. I'm a lawyer. Jill, my wife and managing editor in all things, is an educator, a lifelong educator. We're Los Angeles natives. We grew up in the San Fernando Valley. We went to parochial school. We met in first grade in North Hollywood. Spent 8 years together in the same classroom. Went to sister-brother high schools. Went to Loyola Marymount University. We both obtained advanced degrees. I a JD and Jill an EDD. And have made our lives in Los Angeles. I have absolutely no expertise in politics. I'm not a journalist. I'm a securities litigator. I don't have any particular expertise in what I'm writing about. I read the news and I try to analyze it for my family. Most importantly, I try to bring perspective, which I think is one of the most important things that I try to impress on my daughters and my wife and anyone who will listen to me, that while what we're going through today may seem fearsome, that in fact in the sweep of human history it's all going to be okay, and we're going to work our way through this with a bias towards progress and greater freedom and democracy. So that's where my optimism comes from.
Another question that readers often ask is, how do you do it? How do you write the newsletter every single night? Now let me tell you my perspective, and then we're going to ask Robert his perspective. So as the managing partner, I see him write the newsletter every night, and I will tell you, surprisingly, it's very easy. And I say that because he never frets over the newsletter. He never worries about what he's going to write. He never wrings his hands and says, "Oh, what will be in the newsletter tonight?" He just sits down and writes. It's quite extraordinary. It comes very easy to him. He does his research during the day and while he's writing, and then he just sits down and he writes. Now, it's pretty presumptuous of me to say that it's easy, because I'm sure that there is a lot of difficult and complex things that he has to work through as he writes. But from an outsider's perspective, I see him sit down and write every night and then lay his head on the pillow. Now, over the course of the 4 years, he has made great sacrifices to write the newsletter every night, because he knows what it means to the readers. He has stayed up past midnight because we've gotten home late from an engagement. He has gone outside in the 30-degree weather across the street in the mountain cabin so he could get internet to send it. He has sent the newsletter from Japan, from New York, from wherever he was traveling for his law job. So it's no small feat, this last 4 years of 1,020 newsletters.
So let me just pick up on how I write the newsletter. The process is now pretty refined. I rely on about 15 trusted news sources. I receive alerts throughout the day from those news sources. I scan them as they come in. And I quickly decide whether or not they're worth my time. The ones that are, I just drag and drop on my phone or on my desktop into a stories idea folder for later review. And then I wait till about 8 p.m. to see what actually happened during the day, because in this crazy world, something that happened at 10 a.m. may be old news and outdated by 8 p.m. And then I spend time reflecting back on the stories that I've dropped into my stories idea folder. and try to make sense of it. And as you know, every day I try to come up with a unifying theme, which usually goes in the first several paragraphs of the newsletter. And then it just writes itself. So, as Jill said, it is, at this point, something that just happens. It's organic. I really, really appreciate the emails I receive from readers. At this point, around the election, I'm getting several hundred easily each day, and they are a great joy because, for an odd reason, because of its daily nature, the newsletter is like a little voice in people's heads. People consider me to be their friend, their confidant, maybe even a member of their family. I'm surprised how many readers tell me that they and their spouse read the newsletter out loud to one another at breakfast. So by and large, the overwhelming majority of emails are very positive. People share their family histories, their joys. Sometimes when people pass, I hear about losses in their families. And occasionally, of course, I do receive emails where people take me to task for being too naive or Pollyannish or being optimistic when things seem to be very dark. And that's okay. I don't mind that. In fact, it's the very reason that I'm writing the newsletter, which is to give people hope and to help buck them up and, to give them renewed confidence.
Okay, so this is Baldwin Lake. What we were looking at before was Bower Fountain. This is Baldwin Lake, which surrounds the Queen Anne Cottage, which was the residence of Lucky Baldwin. So this is a lovely reflective spot with all of these little mallards. Many of them think that we're going to feed them. I thought it would be interesting to get your take on some of the most difficult newsletters that you've had to write. I know we said how, quote, easy the newsletter is to write, but there are certain times I know that try us. What would you say about that? Most difficult?
I would say, in terms of knowing what to say, the single most difficult newsletter was the Friday evening when Bill Barr completely misrepresented the substance of the Mueller report. People were crushed. And it turned out, of course, Bill Barr was lying to us, and it took some time to understand that. And by the time that we understood that, the force of the Mueller report had been mitigated or blunted. Another difficult email was right after the 2018 midterm elections, when readers wrote in and they were just in despair, saying, what happened to the blue wave? And there was just great disappointment. And I don't know if any of you recall my response, which was, you're completely missing the point. Whether it was by one seat or more, or two or three, we flipped the House, and we should be grateful for that. And I also urged patience to see what the final result would be. And of course, our patience was rewarded. And then there are the mass shootings at synagogues in Las Vegas and Texas and Philadelphia. There are also the police killings of unarmed black men. I like you, I'm human, and I have my own sadness and disappointment and anger over those events, but I also feel a sense of duty and obligation to say some words of consolation and comfort to the readers. But
we've never been to the Arboretum before. I recommend it. There's lots of lovely little pathways here in the shade. even though raindrops are starting to fall. So as we close, Robert, maybe you can give us some insight about your takeaway from the last 4 years.
Well, my primary thought is one of optimism and perspective. It turns out that America and the Constitution are much more durable and strong than we, I think, have been willing to give it credit for. I think we need to apply perspective, because reflecting over the coverage of the election, for example, a month ago, you will recall the media was telling us that the election would be marred by violence, that there would be Trump supporters and white nationalists with guns scaring people away from the polling places, or as the Atlantic said, this would be the election that broke America. Other people engaged in unwarranted doomsaying. And I think, America and the Constitution have abided, and we should take great comfort in that fact. The other thing that I have come to believe over the last 2 or 3 days is that America is not as divided as the map showing red states and blue states would suggest. In fact, I think what's happened is that the media has characterized the two sides by looking to the extremes of both sides and positing some deep polar divide in America. And that is undoubtedly true in some regard, to some degree, but not in the main. I think that American political beliefs and personal beliefs fall in a bell-shaped curve. And I think that most states are some shade of purple. Most Americans fall at the tall end of the bell-shaped curve. And that while we each can be disappointed that many of the people in the curve who are like us voted for the other candidate, we're much more alike than we are different from one another. And that I believe that we'll make it through this difficult period, just as we've made it through other very difficult periods. And then finally, I think I would just say I'm filled with joy and gratitude that so many Americans have, for the first time in their lives, stepped up to become agents of change and forces for good. And in that, every one of you listening to this should be proud and happy and content and confident looking into the future of this great nation of ours.
And so as we end, let me reiterate our gratitude to you for being on this journey with us. It has been a great comfort to know that there are so many like-minded people who love our country and want it to endure for future generations. But also, let me, at the end here, say a final thank you to Robert, who has kept our spirits up, who has fought for us, who has reassured us, and who's been the best dad and husband over the last 4 years that anybody could ask for.